Hey everybody, Mike Schumann and Seth here for the Daily Hoosier and the East 17th Street podcast. Coming to you following an IU basketball 101-70 win over Milwaukee on Wednesday evening. We're recording here on late Thursday morning. And Seth, it's a good time to be an IU sports fan right now. You got 3-0 IU basketball, you got 3-0 IU women's basketball, you got 10-0 number 2 ranked IU football. I don't know how all this is going to play out, but it's rare in the IU athletic space to have IU basketball and IU football humming at the same time. But so far, that seems to be the direction things are trending. And I want to start with the basketball team, the men's basketball team, specifically coming off a second straight 100-point game, a very impressive start to the season with their, especially on the offensive end. They are shooting. Let me just pull up some of these stats that IU put out last night because I thought it was just pretty compelling, and it reminded me a little bit of the start of the Kurt Signetti era, where you just kind of like, okay, I'm seeing all this stuff that they haven't done in a long time, like first time opening the season with 90 or more points in 3 straight games since 2007-8 season, first time hitting at least 10 threes in 3 straight games since 2016, first time with 20 more assists in 3 straight games since 2012-13. That was a pretty good year. And scored at least 100 points in consecutive games for the first time since 2005. So just a lot of stuff happening right now. And I think they've played kind of 3 different calibers of opponents. I would say they played Milwaukee, who's what I would call a good mid-major. They played Marquette, which is probably a mid-tier high major, and then Alabama A&M, which is just a low major program. But I think they've been tested in different ways. But the continuity of the offense across those 3 games has been really compelling to me.
Yeah, and it's always you always have to remember, 3 games is still a small size. So I think there's a lot to like about what we've seen. There's a lot of tougher competition coming down the road. The tough non-conference game against Louisville, Tucumber really tried to show us something. And then obviously you get into Big Ten play and you're going to be playing harder teams on a regular basis. So, 3 games doesn't necessarily tell you the whole story. But for the story that we have so far, I mean, not like what you've seen from Indiana offensively. I mean, the way they're shooting, especially after the brand of basketball that we saw for the last 8 years, really, under Mike Woodson and Archie Miller, the last 2 eras. I mean, this team can really shoot the ball. They're really, really efficient offensively with the way that they pass the ball, share the ball, move it around, get a lot of assists, and they don't turn it over. There's just not a lot of wasted possessions on this team, and it's really refreshing to watch. It's an entertaining brand of basketball offensively.
Yeah, I think that's the main takeaway that, when I talk to people so far, they're just enjoying, like, it's fun to be an IU basketball fan again. Like even sometimes when they would win games under Archie Miller and Mike Woodson, it was just kind of a grinding the gears, uninspiring type of win. And this is like, you get the sense that, you mentioned that Louisville game in Kentucky down the road. Like you get the sense that even in those games, like they're gonna stay competitive because they're just really hard to, offensively they find ways to get good shots. Now obviously all that gets harder when you're talking about better athletes and better coach teams and more talent and skill. But when you're beating a Marquette by what was it, 23, you're beating you're getting 99.7 points a game. You got to believe at some level that that's going to keep translating to an efficient offense, even though there's going to be some speed bumps.
Yeah, and I mean, the efficiency numbers, at least that we've seen so far, are really, really staggering. I mean, last night they posted, when you look at the per possession, I think it was like 1.48 or something like that points per possession, which is really, really, really ridiculous. That would win you almost any game you play. And putting it in perspective here, last season they were at 1.049 points per possession. When you go back to 22-23, probably the strongest season Indiana's had over the last, those over this team when they got the 4 seed. They were at 1 point. Where was it? I just lost it. It was 1.069 points per possession. This team is like at around 1.4 points per possession through the first 4 games. Is that sustainable for an entire season? Probably not. But I mean, you can, when you're posting numbers that high, I mean, you can drop off a little bit and still have a really strong, one of the best offenses in the Big Ten is what you'd be looking at with those type of numbers.
They're exceeding expectations is what I want to say. You look at KenPom's projections before each game, and they're significantly exceeding them. And that's resulted in Indiana moving from preseason number 40 in KenPom to number 17, which is the best they've been ranked at KenPom since the 22-23 season. And obviously it's early for stuff like that. There's a lot of data that needs to build up in those algorithmic sites like that to make them really meaningful, but it still matters because these games count just as much as the late season games when you're talking about NCAA tournament and the net rankings, and the net really values that aspect that I mentioned, that how you perform versus expectations. And the net is in part fueled by the same model as KenPom, Bart Torvik, etc. How you compete against the expectations. We saw over and over in the Mike Woodson era, they didn't perform as well as they were expected to against mid majors. They got blown out against some high majors, and that hurt them. That might be the number one reason they didn't make the NCAA tournament last year. And this year they're off to the exact opposite start, where they're exceeding those expectations. Now, if they keep playing like this, those expectations will be raised and it'll be harder to do that. But so far, so good along those lines.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, look at the last, especially under Woodson. I mean, what was the biggest talking point about, the way Indiana played? And it was, that this team didn't shoot enough 3-pointers. And that's not going to be a problem with this team. I mean, I'll pull the numbers that I put in my story last night after the game. Indiana in the first 3 games this season so far, 10 for 24 from 3 against Alabama and A&M. And then the last 2, they went 14 for 28. You want to know how many times they attempted 24 or more 3-pointers in a game under Woodson? The most times that they did that in a season was 5 times under Woodson in any season. And they've already done it 3 in the first 3 games under DeVries. And Archie Miller in his first season, they did that 6 times in one season, and then never came above that. I mean, this team just looks like they're built to shoot a lot of threes and shoot them really efficiently. And some of the way that they're able to get those shots, like I mentioned, the ball movement and the really high assist numbers, and they just keep the ball moving. And like I said before, there are going to be nights where it's a little harder, the ball's getting stuck a little more, shots just aren't falling. But I mean, you said it early on that it was just grinding the gears so many times watching this team the last few years, and these games were really just rock fights and slogs. And this is just the complete opposite what we've seen so far.
Yeah, and what I'll say is, I kind of pushed back in the Woodson era about the concept of, they need to shoot more threes. And it wasn't because philosophically I disagreed with that. It was more personnel oriented. It's like, it's great to want to shoot more threes, but if you don't have shooters, it's still not going to go well. And that's where I want to segue here is, the combination of Tucker DeVries and Lamar Wilkerson, I think is lethal. I think if they only had one of them, I think we may not be seeing what we're seeing, but having 2 players like that on the court that have, I really like something Tom Crean said on radio earlier this week. He called Lamar Wilkerson a 4-level scorer because his range is not just to the arc, it's about 10 feet beyond the arc. And so that's the 4th level. And I think Tucker has that too. And because of that, the spacing that they can generate, not just from one of them, but 2 of them, opens up things like we saw last night where Tate Conaway gets to the paint, goes 7 for 7 from 2-point range, because there's really the contesting there is just not as much as it would be, if you had a guy on the block trying to post up, playing quote unquote buddy ball with two bigs. But we're just not seeing that. So it's just a night and day brand. And, I think it's bringing a lot of smiles to IU basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's not perfect by any means. I don't think anyone's going to admit that. And I mean, we've seen, game one, you look at the defensive side too, and the way that they were fouling really against Marquette. And yeah, you could get upset with the way the referees are calling the game, but let's be honest with ourselves. That's going to be a wild card every night in college basketball. And it's just, at a certain point, what's the common denominator? And you get, if you're fouling too much as a defense, that's just, yes, the reputation might be able to follow you a little bit. And if refs know that you're going to be a foul heavy defense, they might be a little more whistle happy with you. But so, maybe a little more of a chicken and egg type of thing than people might realize at first. But I mean, it's, it wasn't really too much of an issue last night, at least not to the level that it was against Marquette where you had foul trouble. But I mean, granted, there was Milwaukee, you said it before, Milwaukee was impressive last night, but still not at the same level that you would expect, against a power conference opponent like Marquette. So, that's something to watch, number one. And rebounding is going to be the big question mark with this team all year. I mean, they can move the ball. Absolutely. They can shoot the ball for sure. Are they going to be able to rebound enough to be competitive in the Big Ten? I think that is going to be, you talk about players being an X factor on the roster. I mean, if you're looking at one area or one facet of the game that's kind of the X factor for this team, it's, are they going to be able to rebound enough?
Yeah, and Darren DeVries said that last night, that they're kind of not even really focusing all that much on their offense right now in practice. It's defense and rebounding, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I didn't think that the calls in the Marquette game were generally bad. That I agreed with DeVries' analysis post game where he said they were handsy, and sometimes those things don't get called. And I won't be surprised if those same calls aren't called in January, February, when we're into the meat of the Big Ten season. That seems to happen every year, but nevertheless.
And you know how the refs will pull the old switcheroo mid game and start calling every little thing after not calling anything. So.
And ordinarily, I wouldn't be overly concerned about it. The one thing that does concern me a little bit with this team is they're not particularly deep, and part of that is that they have a lot of injuries. They did get Nick Dorn back last night, and you can kind of see how he is going to positively impact this team. I do think that they need to get one of those guards that's out right now, either Ristich or Jason Drake. I think there's a need for that kind of that third ball handler to give them, like 8 to 10 minutes a game. You saw that against Marquette where, you lose Connerway or you lose Enright to foul trouble, or in that case, both of them, things get a little dicey, although they handled it exceptionally well. And I think part of that is because, at least from my vantage point, I'm curious what you think. Lamar Wilkerson has impressed me in that regard. Like his assist to turnover ratio, I think, is 12-1 to start the season. And, he's sharing the ball. He came in with this reputation of the shooter, but he's handling ball pressure. He's driving when the driving lanes are there. He's a much more dynamic player than I thought he was going to be so far anyway.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that, because it felt like you're almost like verbatim quoting something that Tatum Connerway said after the game. Just, I asked him just kind of about the ball movement, and, Darren DeVries has said about this team that, this is a group that just, it's such a new team. I mean, this is, they've been together obviously all summer, but I mean, this isn't, Indiana had no returning players from last year, and only, yes, Tucker DeVries and Connor Enright had played together before. And, you may have had a couple of those connections, individually throughout the roster, but it's not like this is a group that largely had experience together aside from preseason. But you just see it doesn't look like that. It looks like a group that's played together for a while. And, Darren DeVries has said, this is a group that just understands how to play the game and how to move the ball, and they understand the shots they need to get and how to get them. And I kind of asked Tatum Connerway about that after the game, and he just starts talking about the way that, Reed Bailey, their biggest player, comes down, pushes the break and sets everything up. And, the way that Tucker DeVries comes off ball screens and can post up and move the ball around. Lamar Wilkerson just moves the ball in so many ways. And, mentioned that, yes, people are going to see Lamar Wilkerson as a shooter. They're going to see Tucker DeVries as a shooter because that's kind of their defining trait. But it's just the way that they can move the ball around and play within a team and make things happen when they don't have the ball and set up looks for everybody else on the court. I mean, these guys aren't just shooters. They're more well-rounded players than they might be getting credit for early on.
Yeah, and I think I don't know how we would define the term, but I'm starting to see something emerge similar to Kurt Signetti's production over potential. Like the thing that stood out to me when DeVries put this team together is so many of the players had high assist numbers at their previous stops, and I got to believe there was a lot of intentionality surrounding that move. I asked Shaka Smart after the Marquette game about his impressions of a team that's only been together for 5 months, um, playing like you're saying, like playing so cohesive, playing so unselfishly. I was a little afraid to ask him because Shaka's like got the reputation of the anti-transfer portal. Like, why did you just get your ass kicked by this team that's only been together for 5 months? But he gave me a really good answer. He said, watching the Baylor exhibition that he could see like mid game them figuring out what was going on, and it takes a special group of guys to do that. He thought the Puerto Rico trip really benefited them, which I agree with both points there. But it's I feel like DeVries, again, it's hyperbolic to say all this stuff. I recognize that, but I do feel like DeVries, given the tight window that he had to put this roster together, his first team, entirely new team, I feel like he really hit a lot of the marks on putting it together. With the exception that the things that we talked about for months going into the season, then do they have enough size? Are they going to be able to rebound? Those are still good questions that I think we won't know the answer to until Louisville and Kentucky.
Yeah, and like you say, it's early, and it's definitely a little early to make fully declarative statements. We definitely like what we see. I also think it's a little dangerous and probably unfair to Darren DeVries to constantly compare him to Signetti, just because they came into different situations, obviously. And I mean, they did both have to fully rebuild everything, but I mean, Signetti obviously just had a much bigger undertaking with IU football, and it's also just it almost creates an unfair expectation for Darren DeVries if people are always, well, Signetti did this, and you start to see the similarities. And it's not that people can't get excited about IU basketball, but let's like think about what Matt Painter said last year about the IU job, and just the way he said it, quit overdoing shit. Like, let's make sure that we keep things realistic here. It's been 3 games, but as we talked about, there's a lot to like from what we've seen so far.
Yeah, it's a fair point. It's one of my pet peeves, kind of covering all IU sports. When people ask the coaches questions about the other coaches, people have been doing it to, I think, Morin and DeVries about Signetti, and Morin's fielded probably 1,000 questions about IU basketball and the history and all that nonsense. But it's also kind of organic because we've just kind of gone through this with Signetti, and we're seeing something that looks vastly different now with DeVries. So those, whether I do them or not, I think those comparisons are going to be there because as we've talked about, Signetti has kind of changed college sports with what he's done at Indiana. Not quite ready to segue there to football, but wanted to talk about Trent Sicily. Like, he came in that game last night. It was, I think it was like 8-6 when he came in. Milwaukee was being pesky and giving him a good fight. He was the one, his minutes in the first half is when they really pulled away for the first time. He continues to impress me. He looked very confident shooting the basketball. Does not look like a freshman out there. What do you see from him so far?
Absolutely. I mean, the confidence really sticks out for a true freshman, and it's it's interesting for for a completely new team and a group that's clearly the fan base is still getting to know. I mean, Sisley is probably the most recognizable face on the team for a lot of people,
Yeah.
even though he's a true freshman, just because, there was all the coverage of him as a recruit and coming through, and, as somebody that was at games and was committed to Mike Woodson, and just he's probably the most recognizable face for a lot of people on this team. And so he's kind of already a fan favorite as a true freshman. But I mean, it's not to say he hasn't earned that role, because he does give Indiana real minutes off the bench. And, I think you saw some of that during preseason as well, but you always got to ask the question of, okay, it's preseason. Is this going to continue into the regular season? Are they just trying some things out minutes wise with certain guys in preseason? It's clear to me now that, I mean, Sisley is going to play a real role in this team. Once like you mentioned, once they get some of these guards back, if they get Alexa Ristich back and it becomes a real part of the rotation, you would think that it probably cuts a little more into the guard play minutes, but it could all kind of trickle down and maybe Sisley played 14 minutes last night. That kind of feels like a realistic number for him, around 14 minutes a game this season. I think you certainly don't want to risk, I guess, overexposing a kid or overexerting a kid like that. And the confidence looks great in those sorts of spurts, but you don't know what's going to happen if you're trying to put him out there for 20 minutes, 25 minutes a night. But that said,
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's going to be nights based on what we've seen. I mean, he had 6 points last night, just those 2 threes he hit. Those are the only points he scored. But I mean, I think based at least on what we've seen, it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that there are going to be nights where Sisley has a hot hand coming off the bench and kind of forces his way into the crunch time lineup if the game is tight.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting as Nick Dorn gets healthier and gets his stamina back, that kind of dynamic between those two, because I feel like they're pretty similar players. Dorn maybe a little bit more towards the wing and Sisley a little bit more towards power forward, but they definitely overlap. And there's clearly a spot in the rotation for both of them. I've gotten to know Sisley's family a little bit from covering recruiting, going all the way back to when he was a freshman. They really feel like that year at Montverde that he spent really kind of just flipped the script for him. He was obviously going to be a high major player anyway, but his ability to step in day one and be a high impact player, I think a lot of people think they attribute to that year he spent there. So I know that's like tough for Indiana high school fans to see players like him leave to go to those prep schools, but I've grown to appreciate why they make those decisions, and I think it really paid off for him. So Indiana plays Incarnate Word on Sunday, and then I think Lindenwood maybe next week. Couple games that kind of feel like we know how those will go. A couple more tune-ups. I like the way their schedule is set up, though. They've got a couple more high major games. They host Kansas State. They start Big Ten play at Minnesota, both before that neutral court game at Louisville or versus Louisville, and then the Kentucky one a couple weeks after that. So there's a couple more challenging games where they can test themselves before they go into what I think we both think here are going to be the 2 games on the non-con that are really going to test them.
Yeah, and I mean, Kansas State at least project, and like you said, the projections, with Ken Palm and all that have to be taken with a grain of salt early in the season, just because you need more data in there to get a real accurate representation of all these teams. But Kansas State right now is 56 in Ken Palm. Marquette, for reference, is 51, and that's after the Indiana game. So those are kind of similar teams. Like Kansas State seems like they're probably more of like a fringe tournament team. Not that you should be poo-pooing a high major game that you're going to get, because it's
Right.
the only home game you're getting from a high major opponent, but it will be more of a test than certainly you're getting from Incarnate Word or Lindenwood. But I still think, Minnesota's not projecting very highly in the Big Ten either, and so you're looking. It's that Louisville game. Once you get to and obviously, I mean, the more we talk about that Louisville game is the right way to segue to football. But it's that Louisville game and that Kentucky game, or where I think we're really going to find out. Okay, is this team for and the thing is, by that point, with the way they schedule and the way they've looked so far, I mean, that might be a ranked matchup. Like Indiana might be ranked by that point, but even if they have a number next to their name, I still think it's going to be those two games where you really start to learn, okay, is this team for real? Or, what are we looking at, as you head towards the meat of Big Ten play?
Yeah, I would like to thank YouTube and Disney for not allowing me to watch the Louisville versus Kentucky game this past week or a couple days ago. So I can't speak to it firsthand. I've seen some highlights. I've seen what a lot of people have said about it. Both of those teams, I think, are at least like Elite Eight caliber teams right now, and their rankings go along with that. I think if that game had been played at Rupp, Kentucky might have pulled it out. But very impressive by Louisville. So, yeah, that's going to be a real challenge. I think what you're alluding to there about segueing to football is December 6th, the IU fan dream day that now seems like a near certainty. Big Ten championship game for football at Lucas Oil. Fans can just walk down to the street from that game, from the IU Louisville basketball game. As you say, probably a ranked game at Gamebridge in the afternoon. Lots of beers and food consumed in between, during, before, after. I can't recall.
The women's team has their Big Ten opener that day too on the road at Illinois, as if there wasn't enough going on.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how we're going to cover all that, but first world problems for everybody. So let's do that. Let's segue to IU football. Feels like it's been an eternity since they beat Penn State on Saturday with the drive of the century, the catch of the century. They turned their tables to Wisconsin, a team, that they've kind of feels like they've replaced. More than replaced. Wisconsin was a team that I think Scott Dolson and others aspired to be, along with, teams like Iowa. I've heard him say that, and they've kind of blown that out of the water. And something I forget, John Beilein said, I asked him during the Archie Miller down years, what it was going to take to get Indiana back. And he said to me that, these cycles happen where some teams rise and some teams fall. And it seems like Indiana is, kind of replacing teams like Wisconsin. It's all cyclical. Wisconsin could get it back, but right now they're 3-6. They're 1-5 in the Big Ten. The good thing for them is they're coming off a ranked win over Washington. The bad thing is they have not scored more than 14 points in any game against a Power 4 team all year. So they had to do that with their defense, which is really the standout aspect of Wisconsin right now. But I think we talked about this in our preseason look at Wisconsin, that Luke Fickell was going to be on the hot seat, that they had an incredibly difficult schedule, and it's all played out. He's probably on the hottest seat in the Big Ten right now, I would say. Maybe Mike Loxley's right there with him.
I mean, I think I saw. I mean, I guess you never know, but I'm pretty sure I saw reports that Wisconsin's going to bring Fickell back. Like, I think they came out and said that they said he's coming back just to, clear the air a bit. Which, I mean, that was interesting.
Yeah, I never put too much into those things, but perhaps they mean it.
One of those things where today we are bringing him back. Tomorrow, right. We said yesterday that we're bringing him back.
Right. Signing day's coming up. We're gonna say that, right?
Right. But I don't think I put that much stock with no disrespect towards Wisconsin fans. I don't think I put that much stock into their win over, and with no disrespect to Washington either. I don't put that much stock into. I mean, Washington having to travel across the country and play in the snow at Wisconsin. And I mean, on the other side, I mean, did you happen to see who Wisconsin's leading passer was in that game?
No.
Wisconsin had 48 total passing yards in that game. and their leading passer was their punter.
I assume there's a fake pun in there that I missed.
I am assuming that was the case as well. Their punter had 24 passing yards, and that was the team high in their win. So, look, I think Indiana coming back home for senior day, coming off of, I mean, again, there's concerns that you saw in that Penn State game, but coming off of, I mean, one of the greatest drives and greatest moments in program history, and just the way I can't imagine how much that's going to energize the fan base coming into the last home game of the regular season, number one. And I mean, you're taking on a Wisconsin team that's looked pretty feeble for a lot of the season. I mean, I think they lost like 37-0 to Iowa or something like that. And I mean, you're giving up 37 points to Iowa, and not Iowa's defense is good, but I mean, that's just, I think that was 1 week after they got clobbered by Ohio State. And, obviously there's no shame in going down big against Ohio State. Ohio State's really good, but I mean, it was 34-0. I had the order wrong. They lost 37-0 to Iowa, and then the next week they lost 34-0 to Ohio State. And it's just, and you're right, you mentioned the murderer's row of a schedule that they had. I mean, 4 straight weeks, they had Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State, Oregon. That's a brutal schedule. And to their credit, Wisconsin did keep it tight against Oregon. I think they probably covered the spread in that game, and it was 21-7 final, but I'm pretty sure Dante Moore got hurt in that game and had to come out for a while. So I think that contributes to the closer score there. But this Wisconsin team just had, I mean, even against Maryland, the week before that Michigan game, that was still in September, but I mean, Maryland went into Camp Randall and won 27-10. And I mean, we've seen what's happened to Maryland since then. And it's just, this Wisconsin, there's not much to like about Wisconsin, I guess, is the TLDR.
Yeah, and the headline thing to not like about Wisconsin is their quarterback situation. Expected.
What, you don't like their punter?
I think he's going to get a lot of work on Saturday. But let me put it, this is the best way that I can put it. Their likely starter on Saturday, he's a freshman. His name's Carter Smith, and he's not even going to be the best Carter Smith in this game. So, that's about the most I can say. He's like 4th string, basically. They started the season with Billy Edwards, and I think their outlook probably would have been much better if he had stayed healthy. But I think it was the first game of the year that he got hurt, and it's just been downhill ever since. I know Danny O'Neal was the backup, and he left the Washington game with what I think people are saying is a serious injury. I've not heard definitively that he's out against IU, but I think everybody expects Carter Smith to be the starter. So we'll see how that goes. Like, I will say this, like, I'm impressed, kind of like I was impressed with Penn State, that they're competing. Like they are, that Washington game, you got to work pretty hard to win a game 13-10. Like it takes a lot to go right, or whatever it was, 14-10. They're competing, but I just don't think against Indiana with how dynamic Indiana's offense is, that even if you stop them a few times, Indiana's defense is probably going to put IU's offense in a lot of advantageous positions. I think it's just going to eventually snowball for Wisconsin against Indiana, because there's too many things working against them.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Wisconsin's team grades in PFF right now, and for those who are unfamiliar, I guess, with the layout of those the grades pages, like if you're best in the country type, up there among the top teams in the country at whatever area it is, like you get a little blue square next to your number, and it kind of, you get down to like a dark green and a light green, and, eventually towards like yellow and orange as you start making your way further and further down. Wisconsin under passing is a dark red. and which is one of the, and so they have the second lowest passing grade as a team in PFF in the nation in FBS, and it's just I just think a team like that's not going to be able to throw the ball, that's going to come at you very one-dimensionally offensively. I just have a hard time seeing a team like that really keeping it competitive with Indiana, especially with a defense that I have to imagine is going to come in playing a little pissed off after what happened at Penn State last week.
Yeah. Indiana's a 29.5-point favorite directionally for this game. Gotta be up there at the all-time point spreads against Wisconsin. I don't ever remember anything remotely like that. In fact, I suspect they've been underdogs every time for the last 20 times they played them, give or take.
It might have been favorites that game in 2020 up at Camp Randall.
Yeah, I think that they were still underdogs, but you could be right. But yeah, with the offense being so one-dimensional, I suspect Indiana, with their propensity to get downhill on defense and try to get TFLs and sacks, this thing could get completely out of hand quickly. I don't know too much what else to say about Wisconsin themselves. It's senior day for Indiana, so there's going to be a lot of emotions on the field. It's pretty cool. Like, these guys like Aiden Fisher and Mikhail Kamara and, others that have kind of just completely, they are the kind of the underpinnings for changing the direction of the program, for all this excitement that everybody feels. And before this game, they're going to have a ceremony with their families, and it's obviously going to be an emotional time for them, and they're going to have to quickly pivot to get back to this game. So we'll see if that has any impact. But I think if you're a fan of this football team, which I know a lot of people are new fans, I see a lot more IU football shirts around the Indy area than I've ever seen in my life. If you're a fan and you're going on Saturday, there's a ceremony at 11:30ish with the seniors with their families that I think you're going to want to check out.
Yeah, I guess the other point that I'll make about the matchup on the field is, I guess on the other side, we were talking about Wisconsin's offense going up against Indiana's defense. When you look at Wisconsin's defense and how they stack up, their defense is not bad by any means. And I think, but when you look at their defense and how it breaks down, within different facets of the game, Wisconsin's run defense is stronger than their pass defense. And it feels like this is the first time in a few weeks where it's been a game that sets up like that. I think, and as the Heisman Trophy conversation has continued to, go on as the weeks have gone on, obviously, Gus Johnson just handed Fernando Mendoza the trophy a little
as did I.
There.
As did I. We
got
caught up.
It's still a very tight race. Yeah, it's still a very tight race. And I think people that are supporting, the other candidates, Julian Sayin or Ty Simpson or, even Marcel Reed or whoever you want to throw in there, people that are, I guess, just taking shots about Fernando's candidacy are pointing out that, his, like last week at Penn State, I thought played pretty better than his numbers suggested, just because of the pressure that he had to face throughout the game and the way that he was still able to, make throws and make plays despite taking hit after hit after hit. Number one. Number two, I thought he made some good throws last week where the ball got dropped or, Penn State's DB made a play, but it was still a good throw. And, that obviously cost him some numbers, not to mention that Indiana got a couple short fields based on those turnovers. And, that obviously just left Fernando with less room to be able to rack up numbers. I think this sets up as a game where Indiana might look to throw the ball a little more. The weather's supposed to be pretty nice. It's going to be in the 60 mid to high 60s on Saturday, sunny. It looks like a nice day. I don't think there's going to be any conditions that should kind of make it difficult to throw and catch the ball. I think it sets up for not to say that Indiana won't be able to run the ball in this matchup on Saturday, but I feel like for everybody that's saying, Fernando's numbers aren't, the pure statistics aren't Heisman worthy, I think this could be a game, more like the Illinois game where Fernando really starts to rack up the high numbers. Maybe you see him go over 300. That's not, I could see it. I don't know if it'll happen, but I think this is maybe a game where you start to see a little more statistical dominance from Fernando versus just kind of looking the part.
Yeah, I will tell anybody who wants to interact with Ohio State fans on social media, just say anything about Fernando's candidacy for the Heisman, and you will somehow algorithmically be sent to the wolves of Ohio State. Like I've had to mute several conversations of posts I made because it's just unbelievable how many Ohio State fans. I thought that they were kind of the fan base that, like, they just won the national championship. They're number one. They wouldn't care about any of this. They'd be very comfortable in their own shoes. But my God, my social media has just been onslaughted by Ohio State fans every time I just dab a toe into that conversation.
Yeah, I mean the team success has been there. To be fair to Ohio State, they haven't had. It surprised me when I realized this that they haven't had a Heisman Trophy winner since 2006. So
Okay.
that might factor into them. That might factor in as well. Them feeling like they're kind of due.
Yeah, everybody says Indiana and Ohio State, the game on December 6th, assuming it happens, will decide it. And I think that's fair, but I really want to see how Julian Sayin plays at Michigan the week before that, because to my mind, Ohio State really hasn't played a tough road game. They played some respectable road games. They played at Washington and a couple others, I think Illinois, but they're Indiana's three toughest road games are all more difficult defenses that Fernando faced than anything Julian Sands faced on the road. And Michigan does have a good defense. He's going to have the pressure of that rivalry. He's going to have the pressure of playing on the road, the pressure of the Heisman chase. I really want to see how he plays in that game. Maybe under a little bit more pressure. He hasn't had to run. He's got probably two of the five best receivers in the country. He's got an elite O line protecting him. I think that could be a game where we really find out what he's made of.
Yeah, to be fair, I think you can make a lot of similar points about the supporting cast with Fernando, but I don't disagree with it. I think you're going to see something one way or the other from Julian Sayin in that Michigan game.
Yep. So that Wisconsin game is on the Big Ten Network. First noon BTN game. I know I had some fun with that earlier in the year, and then lo and behold, they put IU in the noon BTN slot. I don't know if there's like a requirement that you have to do it once each year, but that'll be it for Indiana.
It's not big noon; it's just regular noon.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, guys. It's just ordinary noon BTN that IU fans are very familiar with. I think if you went back since the creation of BTN, I bet they've had more noon BTN games than anyone else in the Big Ten. So that's where that will be. Fortunately for me, I don't know if I've told you this, but I'm going to the game. Owen's not going to be there, so I will be there.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah, Owen was talking about that with me. We can talk off air.
yeah. So what I was gonna say is people in my boat with the Disney dispute aren't going to be impacted. It really doesn't impact football anyway because that they're not part of that Big Ten's deal. But again, noon BTN, the last home game, sold out. Should be a great scene. As you mentioned, the weather is going to be great. Could be a little windy, which could impact the passing game, but nevertheless, I think it's going to be a very good setup for, what is it, November 15th? You don't ordinarily get days even close to that on November 15th. So
I think it's 16th. No, 15th. 15th.
Yeah.
Thursday.
It's only 2 days. Come on.
The days blend together, Mike.
So let's wrap up on IU women's basketball. Not as rosy of a story, even though they are 3-0 as well.
I was going to say, ending on a strong note here, are we?
Yeah. Well, I guess I saved I won't call it the worst. They're 3-0 and they've got the opportunity to kind of work out some kinks. But what concerns me right now, I feel like what I saw the other night was a lot like what I saw last year in games like, what was it, Harvard and Butler, where the turnovers just mounted and they couldn't handle presses and ball pressure. And even, I don't know if you got to watch the UIC game on Friday, but it was kind of the first half of that game was similar too, but they pulled it out. But I've got concerns about this team kind of reverting back to some of the struggles that we saw last year.
Yeah. And I'm willing to give them a little grace and cut them a little slack and say, they're, probably not as new as the men's team is, but they're probably not as new as the men's team is, but they're still very new. I mean, they only had 5 returning players total last season. From last year, they had 1 returning starter. And so, things are still coming together a little bit. It doesn't always happen overnight, which, the way the men's team's playing might blind some people to that. But on the other hand, it's you kind of alluded to it. I mean, they still are having trouble against the press, and it's like I can give a little bit of grace for that, but this is something that Terry Morin's teams have struggled with through several iterations of her roster, and just they brought in more athletic pieces this year. That was the goal, to get more athletic, and you would think that having a more athletic roster would lend itself better to beating the press, but they still had those same kind of issues with it, where, it's a bit of a zone press that Marshall was running the other night, but it's, I saw way too much of, I think Lene Beaumont was the one that was usually inbounding it, and it's not necessarily her alone by any means, and, it's everybody, but I'm just, Lene would inbound it to, Nevaeh Caffey or Shea Chesky, and then they would pass it right back to Beaumont almost every time. Sure, pass it to the open player. And then Beaumont or whoever, or whether it was somebody else doing it, they'd pass it back to the inbounder. They would stand there for 1 or 2 seconds and let things develop ahead of them. But then all of a sudden, you're backed up against your own baseline and you have like 6 seconds to get it across the time. And one thing, you get physical defense from one player and you're starting to cut it close. And it's just, I see that way too much with this team, and it's still early and things can get better. But like I said, that's something that it's the biggest indictment on Terry Morin as a coach, as great as she's been for this program. And I am not knocking that by any means, but the biggest indictment on her coaching and her teams of the last however many years is that they consistently cannot beat a press defense. And, maybe you see it in one game or one half and they figure it out for a little bit, but the problems always seem to come back. When you talk about, they had 28 turnovers in one game, which is, ridiculous, astounding, unacceptable. I'll pick your ass there, 28 turnovers in one game. But, it went beyond that too. They were 11 for 22 on layups against Marshall. You're not going to win Big Ten basketball games if you're not making the easy looks like that. You're just not.
Right.
And, you could get into the individual makeup of this roster a little bit and just what type of, and just where I might have a little bit of depth concerns in some places, particularly in the front court. I think Xenia Saka and Guman looks like really good. I still kind of question, how is she going to fare when the opponents start getting more physical and tougher, and you get into Big Ten play and you're facing that on a regular basis. I don't really like the depth Indiana has behind her, and I think it feels like for all the new additions that they added to this team, they still feel kind of short in the front court. Terry is still kind of playing only 8 players right now, and 1 or 2 players that maybe you thought were going to play big roles don't really look like they're bound for big roles. So we'll see what happens. They have Florida State on Sunday, which is their first high major opponent. And, you saw they looked better, I think, in their season opener. Indiana did. But, what you saw against Marshall it was a train wreck of the game. And I think, had Marshall, I think, number 123 going into that game. So it's not like Marshall was, a pushover opponent type of deal where you're sub 300.
Right.
But Marshall didn't really look the part. I think, and against a lot more competent opponents, not even just high major opponents. I think Indiana would lose the way they played on Tuesday. I think Indiana would lose that game probably like 7 times out of 10.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's weird because I might have put a curse on them because there was a game at Tennessee probably 3 years ago where they got up big and then Tennessee started pressing, and IU was so impressive against Tennessee's press that I pulled my kids aside and said, watch how they're handling this press break. Because for people who have kids in youth basketball, you know that breaking the press is just a complete train wreck nightmare, kind of like what we saw against Marshall. But I just like was pointing out, like, look how composed they are. Look at these passes that they're making. Now, some of it could be the style of press. Does a team press every game where they're really good at it and they've recruited to that style like Ohio State? But ever since that game, I think that was the same year that they blew the big lead against Ohio State in the Big Ten tournament because of the press. Ever since then, they've been just a complete mess trying to break presses. So I don't know what's happened.
Yeah, and like I said, you still see it work in individual games here or there, or maybe a little half or a quarter where they start to figure some stuff out, and suddenly it's not a problem, and the team might call off the press. But I mean, if I was an opponent that was game planning to face IU women's basketball, I would immediately be putting in a press until they show that they can stop it. The other aspect from Tuesday's game is Marshall, in addition to running the press, was using a 2-3 zone almost all game. And Indiana had so much trouble figuring that out. And that concerns me also, because number one, it goes back to, you wanted to get more athletic and you wanted to get quicker. And I mean, you saw teams like Illinois last year, the last few years they're a good example. Illinois is not the best team in the Big Ten, but just they had quick players that were really consistently, I think, just torching IU up and down the court, and A, making them tired, but B, just Indiana couldn't keep up with their speed really on either end, it felt like. And when you have faster players, it feels like that should help you when you're going against a 2-3 zone, with the way, obviously, you want to get the ball in the middle, but the way that you can cut in and be able to kind of aggressively draw in defenders and then kick it out. I mean, that's what you need to do, right, against a 2-3 zone. And they just looked so flummoxed by this, as if they hadn't seen it before. And yeah, I mean, you're not going to see a 2-3 zone every night, but it's like, it doesn't feel, it feels like a simple, obviously it's easier to say how to beat it than to actually do it, especially if it's a good 2-3 zone. But like a 2-3 zone isn't like such a complicated basketball like strategy scenario.
It's not new.
Like, you should have, right. Like you should, it concerned me a little bit that they had as much trouble as they did breaking down a 2-3 zone against a mid-major.
Yeah. I think one thing to keep in mind, everybody expects Lene Beaumont to be a big factor for this team this year. But, if you talk to people about coming back from a major knee injury, they'll say you can like physically do it in 12 months, but the time to really get back to where you were is more like 18. So I don't know where she's at from a overall timeline in that context, but I think it could be a situation where she's going to kind of over the year progress back to what she's capable of. And same goes for the team as a whole. Like we saw this last year, I mentioned the Harvard and Butler games, and they ended up getting to the NCAA tournament, winning a game. I can see that path developing. I don't think there's any reason to really worry about Terry Morin or her staff or their competency when it comes to kind of getting this team where they need to be by March, but it's certainly not pretty right now.
Yeah, and I think if you squint in some areas, I think you see it, at least what they're going for. And they're starting a true freshman at point guard in Nevaeh Caffey. And I think that's important to remember. She's a true freshman. She's looked good in spurts. I think you got to imagine, she might go through some struggles at some point, but I mean, Indiana's probably hoping or figuring that she's going to get better with more reps and more games. I think Maya Makalewski off the bench as well is somebody that, I've heard one or two other beat writers express a little skepticism when I've said this to them, but I still think I think Maya is going to get better as she goes along. I think her shooting has been a little erratic, I think, so far, and she's got to figure some stuff out defensively. But I think a lot of that, I feel like, is just she's going to settle in. And maybe I'm wrong with that, but she was a really highly touted player coming out of high school, a great shooter. And I think she's going to she's already, playing a real role off the bench, excuse me. But I think she's going to settle in. And once she does, I think that's a real weapon for Indiana to have. And it's important because, I mean, I mentioned the depth a few times. I mean, I think in that Marshall game at one point, like the starting lineup was plus, everybody was like plus 15 or so. And then the three players off the bench were like around zero, like +1, -1. And then, plus minus can be a flawed stat sometimes, but that told me something that just they're not getting enough out of their bench right now. I think they need Maya to grow up, and that might not be fair to her, but I think they need her to settle in. They're going to need their bench to pick it up, number one. And I think the biggest concern to me with this team right now is Shea Chesky. I mean, she won Big Ten Player of the Week for the first week of the season. She's off to a really good start. The bright spot of that Marshall game was she had 10 rebounds, her first career double-double.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've said it on here before. I mean, she's 5'7". She's almost always the smallest player on the court. Sometimes it's problematically small. I mean, that's impressive for her to get 10 rebounds. She showed some good hustle in that game. I mean, that was, probably the biggest bright spot of the game for Indiana. It feels to me like if they're having an off night from Shea, and if Big Z isn't giving them enough or gets in foul trouble or anything, I just am not confident right now that there's somebody else to step up and to get Indiana over the line. I think that's the biggest concern I have with this team right now.
Yeah, it's a heavy burden for Shea, certainly, because I completely agree. If she's not clicking, nothing seems to really go right with him. But she's been really good so far. So I think we can leave it for there. Like you said, they play Florida State. I think we'll find out a lot, and we'll see how it goes. Again, IU football, noon Eastern, Saturday. Wisconsin, IU basketball, Sunday, I think 5:30 Eastern, Incarnate Word. Loaded weekend for IU fans. We'll obviously cover all of it, and we'll leave it right there. He is Seth Tao. I am Mike Schumann for the Daily Hoosier and the East 17th Street podcast. We will catch you guys all later.